recording. And I'm going to share my screen. And you should be able to see my screen now. And if you haven't, pull latest from curriculum. We're going to be, week 9, day 1, which is what today is. And we're going to be talking about React Router over here. And there's an equivalent file over here in demos and notes. So in demos and notes, we have, the week 9, day 1 React Router folder. And there's 2 things in there, examples and video store part 4. We will, of course, get to video store part 4, but until we get to that point, we'll just be talking a little bit and maybe using this example here, this example project called React Router Example, which is just a bootstrapped project. So, just some files here and stuff, and we're running it over here. Cool. But for now, I'm going to head back here. And yeah, so, right. Also, let me get this Slido poll up. So let me see if I can do that real quick. You know what? Maybe we'll do that tomorrow, actually. Slido is just like this interactive means of asking the class polls, and I read something about like a nice way of using a simple like green light, red light, yellow light type poll thing to gauge how everybody is feeling at any given point in the class. So we're going to use that eventually, but today I might ask you, green light, red light, yellow light in terms of move on or stick to what we're currently talking about, or just, slow down the pace slightly. Cool. So the topic of today is essentially going to be client-side routing. So up until now, we've used React to build front-end websites, and through day 3, we learned, how to use React in a basic way, and then how to add state to make it more of a living thing that, reflects data in some way. And then when we learned use effect on day 3, we had a full app at that point where we, even though we were talking to an API that we didn't own, theoretically, we could talk to our own API and could use that to, persist data or make, the app truly persistent and like a real app. So what we're going to be covering today is our first library that is meant to work with React and expand its functionality in a way that we wouldn't easily be able to get otherwise. So that new bit of functionality is something that we call client-side routing or front-end routing. Tend to use these words, client-side routing, meaning front-end routing, or server-side routing, meaning back-end routing. I will use those interchangeably, but essentially it's a form of routing we have not seen yet. So in order to even contextualize it, let's first talk about server-side routing. So I have this little link right here that you should be able to see. Might as well make it big here. So that link is in the notes, and it's just I just like to use this to review, because this is all that's ultimately ever happening. It's worth remembering. So when we do server-side routing, we have, the client, which is the user on their browser, and the server, which is the website you as a programmer own and where you're hosting your website. And so the client is going to request a certain URL, and the server is going to match that URL in Django or something like that. And it's going to serve up specific resources in response. And so those resources are ultimately all packed up in a single thing called an HTML page, which might link to other resources. And all of that is sent to the client in response. And then once the client receives it, it renders the HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And then let's say in this HTML page, there was a link, and that link was to /about. So, you served up a page and there happens to be a link on that page to a relative URL. So not, www.google.com, but whatever your website is, instead of slash, we actually want slash about. So what happens? Well, we make a whole new request to the backend for slash about now. And we see it, and we might, we might serve up a similar page. Maybe we're using Django templates or something, so we're building a page on the fly. But ultimately, we're going to serve up a page that's probably pretty similar to the page we just served up, and we send all those resources back, and all those resources are re-rendered as if they've never been seen before. And that's it. That's the end of it. And you just get like a complete refresh. So we already are familiar with server-side routing, and when you have server-side routing, you can serve up you could serve up as many different pages as you want, and maybe you're using something like Django templates, so the pages share a lot in common. But ultimately, every time a link is clicked, you're going all the way to your backend and back, and you're probably grabbing a lot of the same resources, and you're re-rendering everything. So it might not seem significant, but let's say, the first time you went, you grabbed all the CSS, and then your HTML page actually got to that point and read that file and, applied that CSS. Let's say you had 2,000 CSS rules. It's going to take a non-trivial amount of time. I mean, maybe it's ultimately only like a minute or 45 seconds or something, but it's going to take a period of time to read all of that. And what we just did, going back to the server, getting this slash about page, we got all those resources again, and we're totally refreshing. So we're doing a lot of extra work when, the CSS is probably identical, right? So basically, server-side routing totally works, no problem with it. It just isn't the most efficient way of doing things if you're going to keep clicking links and you're ultimately on the same site, but you're just, re-downloading the same resources every time. Okay, so that is a refresher on server-side routing. Let's move that over here. Okay, that's server-side routing. And this is just an example. This is maybe pseudocode, but this is what it would look like from Django, something like this, where we're serving up some page or another, or we're routing to a specific route or another based on the URL. But even this approach, like maybe this makes sense with Django templates, but what actually happens when we create a React app? Like, are we just getting, do we have different HTML pages? Can we use this Django templates approach? Well, if I go here and I look at my project, let me just exit out of that. You'll notice that in any React project, so I'm just going to use this React router example, but it's true for any React project bootstrapped with something like Vite. If I look at the package.json, you'll notice that there is a script called dev, and that's what we've been using to run it. But there's also a script called build. So what happens when we run build? Let's do npm run build. And a bunch happened there, and you'll see that we got this new folder called dist, which is grayed out because it knows to ignore it by default. But what's in there is first this assets folder, and then an index.html, and that index.html references that assets folder. And the assets folder is just a gigantic JavaScript file that has everything we are using in our project, including React, directly in there, but in some kind of minified form so that, it's smaller to send over a wire, but also, it's it doesn't need to be easy to read. So that's why it's like this. So this looks like nonsense, but this is ultimately our whole app, and all of its dependencies just contained in a single line of code, more or less. Cool. So when we are actually distributing our app, all we're sending out is this single index.html with this single JavaScript file. So how would we even split it up, saying, okay, well, when someone goes to slash, I want to serve up this page, but when someone goes to slash about, I want to serve up a slightly different page. So we don't even have a way to do that with React yet, but we are seeing that if we try and use, server-side routing as we understand it, we're basically going to have to make it so that when the user goes to slash, we serve up, our React site. When the user goes to slash about, we serve up the exact same React site. And that's a little wasteful, but even more so, we don't even have a way of saying what URL are you on and how does that affect what you're seeing on the site. Okay, so that brings us to this new idea called client-side routing. And all that really means is that your React app is going to be aware of the URL. It's going to be able to update the URL, and it's going to be able to respond to updates to the URL. So when someone clicks on a link from, let's say if someone goes to slash, and I can show this over here. So if I do npm run dev, and gonna open that up here, and we're just going to put it over here. Okay, so if I go to this site here, and I'm going to open up my dev console here. So you see home here, right? And this is using React Router. So I have home here, and that's exactly where I am. And if I hit enter, I'm going to home and I'm downloading the whole thing. And if I go to the network tab, I can see this. So I can, I'm going to clear all this, and then I'm going to hit enter here. And we did, we downloaded a lot of information. It seems like it happens very fast because we're serving it from the same computer where, the client and the server are the same computer right now. So there's not a lot that has to happen. But if the client was, thousands of miles away, this would take longer. But notice that, normally if I were to hit about here, that would go to another website, and it would take a second. So I can actually just throw that in there. If I don't worry about the details right now, but I'm just going to, let's say an app here. I have all these links, right? So don't worry too much about the details, but I'm going to have a link down here, or I'll have a link right below slash, which I'm going to call naive / about, and that is going to be an A. And it has to go somewhere, so we're going to give it an href, and that href is just going to be /about. So I'm going to save that, and we're going to reload. And so notice this, okay? So I went to the site and I downloaded a bunch of stuff, and now I'm going to click naive / about. What happens? It happened real quickly, but the page reloaded, and we downloaded all of this, all these resources all over again, just to show a nearly identical page. And similarly, if I go home, well, that's because home is a link. So notice the difference between this, though. If I click this about, we get the same thing. We updated /about. We see about page here. We didn't download any new resources. So this is the main thing client-side routing really buys you, which is I now have a React site where I'm able to say /about /home. I'm able to go to any URL I want. But my app is smart enough that it's not going all the way back to the server to say, hey, can I get all the new resources? It's all contained in that one thing it downloaded when it went to slash. And now when I hit about, it doesn't go to the backend. It just looks very quickly at the, on the client side, it looks at this, root router component and says, oh, I have something that matches /about. Let me render that component. And we're making no extra trip to the backend. We're not re-downloading resources unnecessarily. And that is essentially the point of client-side routing. It's not a necessary feature, but it does make the whole single page application thing actually true. Or, we're sort of reaching for this goal called a single page application, which essentially means like it's just as seamless and fast as an app actually natively running on the person's computer, which of course it isn't. It's, downloading and constantly communicating with a computer far away. So to get this seamless experience, we do things that we're kind of looking for every way we can cut down on actually, speaking to the backend more than necessary. Whew. Okay, so I hate that this always gets out of, where is everything? Yeah. Okay, we're gonna go back here. Sorry about the jumping around. And here is our client-side routing part 2, which is the same as this first thing here, but now we're gonna show the rest of the slides. So just showing this client-side routing idea from this perspective, from the slides perspective, we make a request to the website. It matches / and whatever the output of npm run build was, that HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We serve that up in response to / we send all those resources back. Because we're using React Router, it sees that / and matches it to a specific component. Homepage, that's what we render. And then on homepage, we're going to see this thing called link, which is like an A, but it's React Router aware, because if you use an A, it has no idea you want to do this React Router type stuff. And we're going to link to /about, so it's going to try and grab the /about page, but of course, it doesn't need to go to the backend. So we don't make any, at least right now, we're not making any future backend calls. React Router just sees, oh, okay, /about matches not the home page, but the about page. Let's just render just that. So before we move on, let's stop here to ask questions. But I will tell you that if we look at our notes, so I hate that it just jumps around on me. This I don't know. It makes me a little crazy that it won't just keep the desktops in the right order when you're moving around. Before we move on, let's ask any questions we have about this, but notice that we do have a point in which we talk about front-end versus back-end routing, because this is a weird concept. We are just learning about it right now. We just have it as an idea, and we haven't even tried to implement it yet. So we will see this in more detail in a second, essentially. But I do want to stop here to say questions.
Good question.
Yeah.
And it's more on the philosophy side of it. I was trying to play around with this a little bit, and I got to a point where it made more sense to alter state than to alter the URL. So when working with Django, especially like in the last project, it made a lot of sense to have the URL be, gosh, what was the last project? Have a list of all the items and then / an ID to give the detail on an item.
Yeah.
And I realized that it was actually really hard to have a separate page with that detail. But you had to do that with the server-side routing because you're sending it back. Would you really have a different URL for each different kind of view in a React, or is that less important in React?
From when you say a different kind of view, you mean like?
So like if I'm looking at, so there's a list of things and I want to look at, I click on any individual thing and make it come up with that. Would that be a separate page? Would you like / that in the URL for React to be able to show that differently? Or is that kind of more, because every time I keep coming back to the single page application, it seems like maybe that idea, like if you're looking at this item versus that item and having a different URL on the top to show you that it's separate, maybe that's an older style of doing it and not so much applicable to React.
I'm not positive, but I understand exactly what you're saying. But what we're going to see is that when we serve up, like normally we're serving up our React page on like / or something, right? So what we're going towards is something where whether whether the person goes to your backend with / or / about or anything like that, you're always going to be serving up the exact same React page. But the idea is that on the client side, up until now, you've just had one React page basically, and it's not been URL aware. And now we're making it so it is URL aware without having to go back to the backend. I wonder if just looking at, the basic example will answer any of these questions. So maybe we should do that first. But keep that question in mind, because if we get to front end versus back end routing and it still is unanswered, then yes, let's come back to it. Because I believe what you're asking is essential question and important, because it does get confusing what the difference between these two things are. But maybe we just haven't seen enough yet, and that's my bad, that we should go a little further first.
No, like I said, it was more of a philosophy question, which probably will have more to say on it by the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
hopefully. So the answer to your philosophy question might be, I don't know if this is the exact question, but client-side routing is not replacing back-end routing at all. It's always additional, if that makes sense. Like your backend still needs to serve up your app. And if client-side routing is powerful, but ultimately if someone goes to the URL bar and hits enter, that's always backend routing. And that's part of what we discussed in the difference thing. So if someone goes to your URL and hits enter, or someone sees an actual A link and hits it, that's always going to go to the backend and grab a fresh page. And so that is, server-side routing. That's talking to a backend. And it's only with React Router that we get this nice little thing where I can click, home or /about, and you're noticing that over here, it is changing the page, but we're not getting any re-rendering. It's literally just looking up a component it already has access to on the client side. Okay, but we might as well do these next steps to see. So this is something you can do with me. I already have the example ready, but it's only a few steps, which is we're going to create a new project with Vite and call it React Router Example. And of course, select React and JavaScript like you have, and then we're going to cd into that folder that we created. And first, we're going to do npm install to install its regular dependencies, and then maybe we'll add a few dependencies. First, I added Axios, which we probably will eventually use, and then React Router DOM is what the React Router library is called. And then finally, we do npm run dev, and that's ultimately all that is happening on this page here. And I'll fill in the details on what we actually add to it. But you'll notice that if I look in this package.json, indeed I have, React and React DOM, which came with it, but also now Axios and React Router DOM. So as long as you have these dependencies and you can build, that's a good place to start. And now we're gonna, slightly replace the default components it gives us to make the page our own. So anything that's extraneous, you can ultimately delete, like the CSS files or the, assets or logo or anything like that, because we're not going to be using them. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a components folder, because that's a, folder structure that I like. We're going to put all of our non-root type components in the components folder. And I'm going to make two files called homepage and about page. So I'm making really simple files here just to show that we can, see new files, but obviously they could be as specific as they want to be. So we have one called homepage and another called about page. And so those are right here, where if I look in my components folder, I have a few others here now, but I have homepage, simple, about page. And the next step is we're going to create a new file at the source level. So that's exactly where we see app.jsx and main.jsx. And we're going to call it router.jsx. And that's going to look like this, where first we're importing something from React Router DOM. And then we're importing, some of these pages we might want to care about. And then I'm feeding an object, which is an array, into this function we got from React Router DOM called create browser router. And this is a newish way they are doing things, because I learned this by looking at their tutorial, and they kind of really updated their API recently. Not that you can't do it the old way, but they are saying do it this way now. And hopefully this is self-explanatory to read, but basically this list here can be a list of unique paths. But the way I decided to do it, we just have one path to start, which is slash. So this object represents that one path, and that path is slash, and on slash we serve up app. But then we're also saying that this path has children, and there's 2 children. And that first child, we say index true to mean when we just have slash, then serve up the home page. So we're going to see how these are related, but we're going to be serving up app and then sub-serving up the home page if it's just slash. And if it's slash about, we'll serve up the app, and then its sub page is going to be about page. And we'll see how those are connected in 1 second. And we'll go over this. So right, that creates this little object. And then the next thing is that at that top level, where main.jsx is, we're actually going to update this. We haven't really updated this much before, but we're going to update main.jsx itself. And we're going to take app out entirely. We're not rendering app as our top level thing. Instead, we're rendering this thing called router provider. And router provider takes one argument called router, and that's exactly what we are exporting from this new router file of ours. And what that's going to do is that is now the top level of our app, and it makes the whole app router aware. And then this router object determines what gets, rendered when. So we're, and then the question is, okay, so we're saying render app, but also render homepage or also render about page. How do you also render something? Well, that is step 4, which is to update the app component. And it's going to look like this. And we have this import statement up here. We're grabbing 2 things from React Router down, one called link, one called outlet. So app is kind of our top level page now. Every page is going to share this in common. And we are going to use link to link between, different URLs on our front end, client-side routing. So we're going to link to different things, but in a way that is React Router aware. And then importantly, we have this little section here, and then we put the outlet in there. And the idea is that when we go to slash, we're going to see this page. And then we're going to see this page, but it's also going to match the home page. And home page is now going to be what gets, replaced or what replaces outlet. And if someone went to slash about, we'd again see this whole page, but outlet would get replaced with about page. And yeah, that is all specified here. But this is the basic layout, and we just want to see it first so we can talk about it and ask questions. And this is what I have here. I have slightly more here at this point. But this is how we are producing this page. So let's ask questions and walk through this, starting from main.jsx to understand how it's all hooked up. So I don't imagine anyone has deeply groks this yet. I'm going to look at the chat for a second. I see we have some questions about why have different URLs at all. Do we want to dig in on that, Dan? Or
well, it was back when Mickey was talking to you about kind of the philosophy or the design approach. If the goal is to have a single state or single page app, like why bother with URLs at all when you can just constantly re-render that same page based on input or state or
yeah, well, it's a very good question. And I think it's right to ask questions like that, because in my opinion, a good engineer doesn't just say like, oh, new thing, new thing, new thing. Every time there's a new thing, you say, why? Do we actually need this? Are we gaining anything? So what I'll tell you is first, based on what Mickey said, you are correct that everything could just be done with state. You could, and even without using React Router, we could use React to look at the URL or to update the URL and use state to know where we are. And that's exactly what React Router is doing under the hood. Point, I guess, is that users are used to thinking in URLs. So imagine a site like Amazon. Think about how many URLs are off of Amazon.com, right? If it was truly a single page application, the URLs were not a way to say, oh, this part of the website, that part of the website, you'd be overwhelmed, right? And let's say you had to return to the website. Well, you would just put in Amazon.com/ you would go to the front page of Amazon, and let's say you were trying to go back to that specific item. How do you get back to that specific item? You got to follow your same steps, right? So we're trying to address this problem with, single page applications as we so far know them, which is that it's not utilizing this language of the URL to tell the user, oh, you're specifically here. This is what you care about. So does that justify this approach?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, coming from someone that never reads a URL or never uses a back button, that's why I was like, why would you ever do this? But
yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
yeah, I could see.
But
I was also curious if it had something to do with like the team implementation, because clearly Amazon's not written by like one person or three people or whatever. So I was wondering if it was unique to say, okay, well, we have like a slash login, right?
Mhm.
And then we have a team that only deals with that. And so they don't have to like worry about all the other routing and stuff. They can just focus on that. I didn't know if that's how that worked.
Yeah, well, I mean, intuitively, you are correct that that is how at a big enough company that is how things work. In that, I remember when I worked at Microsoft, I was working on like one page on a website off of off of Microsoft / blah 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 / Azure / blah blah blah, our specific thing, and I had no access to anything else. Literally locked down. I couldn't fix a typo. I learned very quickly on a part of the website I did not personally own, and it was a real hassle to even notify the people, hey, there's a typo, someone should just fix it. And that is one thing that you can do, but it sort of points at the more general thing, which is just URLs are a nice way to split things up and say, hey, when you're at this URL, we can just narrow it down to saying you're only looking at this, right? And URLs are just, I mean, a URL, what it is, the thing stands for Universal Resource Locator. And so even though we're not using it exactly like that, like it's not a specific resource we're associating anymore, we do like the idea that if someone puts in the exact URL they were at when they, went as far as they did into your website as they did, if they put that same URL in, they should go back to exactly where they were. And without this feature, they wouldn't. They would start over at sort of the beginning of the page and have to navigate back themselves. So, so yeah, that is part of it. And also this general idea of SEO, so search engine optimization. This is always a tricky thing because Google is always changing how they look at things, but search engines tend to not be so wise to JavaScript. They really prefer HTML. And so when they see, when your website only really has URLs in the form of JavaScript, it can get confused by that. And I don't even know if React Router solves that especially. But I guess at the very least, we have multiple URLs now, and Google can learn a different thing about each one of those URLs, and that can be helpful to us. Yeah, hopefully I don't know that I am justifying it so much, but as we go on, keep asking these questions, because if it doesn't feel justified by the end, that is meaningful. And also, there are people out there that would say, I don't like doing it this way. I don't believe in, client-side routing. And that would be a perfectly legitimate answer. Like I know one popular alternative to React Router is Next.js, and it does things in a slightly different way. And that's what I'm mostly used to using. But we deemed it a slightly too powerful, frameworky type of thing to teach. We would rather just teach a specific thing that gives you this one feature called client-side routing, and that is React Router. But yeah, do we want to go through this code right now? Where like I'm sure we still have questions. Like, does anyone want to volunteer to walk with me through this, just so we see what all the moving pieces are? Because it's good to get into this habit as a programmer where, like, you want to say something like, okay, I'm gonna put in this URL, hit enter. Now, what's everything that happened from receiving my, React app to actually rendering exactly this? You want to actually be able to walk through what is happening. So does anyone want to collect or do this with me? Does anyone? I wish I could like give candy to you guys, because like I need like some incentive to be like, hey, there's like a mini Twix if you volunteer and play along. But you're also not 4, so makes sense that might not be the best bribe.
I can walk through it if you don't mind, unless.
Yep, no, love it. Let's do it.
All right, so we put router provider here, and then use the prop router and pass the router that we created. I think it's in. Is it app.jsx?
Well,
That file.
Well, let's see. So you're saying that first first things first. Let's look.
Oh, it's router JSX. I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Well, first,
where do you want me to start off from? I should ask that first.
well, I know. I think you did the right thing. That first things first, our app starts in main.jsx, as in the first thing it reads is this. And what this does is hook React into our HTML page in some way. And we don't often think about it that often, but that is what's happening. Is in we're actually finding an element on this HTML page we served up, which is over here.
Right.
And once we, and like this is, so what actually, the first thing that actually runs is this index.html. It doesn't really do much until it hits this script, which is main.jsx. Then in main.jsx, we run it. And the first thing it does is say, okay, find this element by ID root, which is this element right here, which is empty. And then we say, well, that's actually our React app. So, ignoring this strict mode stuff, our root level thing is going to be this component right here. And then for the rest of the app, this is what we understand to be our root level thing.
Okay, cool. So I'll start off from there then.
Cool.
Sweet. All right. So if we go to router.jsx, so we can actually look at our router.
Yeah. So just to clarify, you are correct. But to clarify for everybody, right, our root level thing is provided for us from React Router. It's called router provider. Takes exactly one argument, which is the thing we passed it in router. And now let's look at what we actually passed it in router. Cool.
Okay, cool. So then from React Router DOM, we imported the create browser router here.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going to allow us to set our paths. And it's an object, which we set our first path to being indexed, which we're pretty used to in Django doing. But here, the difference, and it's pretty similar to views dot whatever view, it says here path is when you go to path, the element to be rendered is your app component.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll look at the app component, which is app.jsx.
Yep.
And in there, this is what is going to happen. Now, one thing too that took a minute for me to kind of comprehend is the request is still being sent out when you link to another /about, /doesn't exist, whatever. But React Router DOM actually reaches out and grabs that request and cancels the request and forces you to obey, or forces your app to obey by router.jsx. And everything that you list in there, similar to how we did in Django with the views or the URL patterns. So router.jsx is technically our URL patterns for React.
Exactly.
So if we go back to router.jsx, now you'll see in here, if there is no app, if there is an error, your try catch, your error element, error page will render.
Yeah.
So we got that out of the way.
We'll get into that later. No need to worry yet about the error page stuff, but you're intuiting correctly. Yeah.
Cool. So we'll jump into children. So this is saying path and then your string or ID, your children. So /.children. So your /about is the path, which will render your element about page.
Yeah. And where does it render about? page.
Well, I'm sorry, say that again.
So you're saying if I do slash about, it's going to render about page, but where does about page actually get rendered?
Where you're, well, it's the outlet. So if you jump, yeah, if you jump into app.jsx and in the section, your outlet here, which when your request goes out, React Router DOM grabs that request, cancels the request, and forces the router to push all your code or your component into this outlet.
Yeah.
So
I'll just correct you a little there so we don't go too far into this. It's not doing any kind of canceling. It never even sets off a backend request because, and this is why, and we'll get into this, we're using this component called link. So if we used A is going to send off a backend request, and maybe if we were really clever, we'd have some code that like catches that and cancels it and just does something instead. But this link thing here, it's not really a link. It looks like a link, but it doesn't kick off anything to the backend. It just tells React Router, hey, they just switched the URL. It's literally just like updating a prop. It's some string that was slash, and now that string is slash about. And because and link is just there to tell this, you know, really this component over here, but defined with this object. It's here to tell this object, oh, well, they were on slash, but look at it again because they just went to slash about. Now you're rendering something slightly different.
Okay, yeah, all right. So any external ones that you want to stick in the app, you're right. Okay, my apologies on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for people to make sure that they understood. It's actually even simpler than canceling something. It's literally just like Mickey was implying, like it's just state behind the scenes. It's just literally updating some value and responding to that change.
Cool. Yeah, and then you see anything there, we got slash about, slash does English, slash Pokemon, slash 404. Yeah, so those ones won't go out. Those will stay and render in the outlet. And this is kind of similar to sending up the template or layout in Django templates, and then just using extends. So that's a kind of way to think about it. And then anything outside of that, I mean, I think that covers it, outside of maybe extending the browser router a little bit. So you're not going to, or looking at a little bit more, but we kind of cover all the routes here. So
yeah, that was excellent. You covered everything. Everything about that was right. There is some stuff in here that I'm like, you don't have to cover that yet because we will get to it. But essentially you understand the pattern, which is that first, why are we even doing it this way with children? The reason I'm doing it this way is because often there's something you want to show for every page. So app here is going to represent what every page has in common, which in this case is just going to be a nav bar. But often you're going to have these things nested in such a way that, I just have like a simple version of that nesting here where I have exactly one path and then children. But you can imagine this could get complex where it could be like, maybe a couple of pages share a certain bit in common, and then even more pages share, a wider bit in common. And you can get really fine-grained about what is shared in common and what isn't. And it's not just like, oh, you're serving up a whole new page, whether it's, this URL or that. And you can kind of see how, like, if I wanted to add a brand new page, all I would have to do is go in here and say, okay, new path, whatever that path is, new element associated with that path. I mean, we might as well do that now. Let's say I wanted to create a new component. So I'm going to create a new component, and what should this component be? What is something? Contact or something. So we're going to say contact page, and we're just creating a normal React component now. So does anyone want to tell me how we create, normal React component called contact page? It's an easy one. This is just like, you've seen this now. Yeah, I see in the chat, export default. Indeed. So we start typing export default. What are we exporting defaultly? A function. What do we want to name that function? Contact page, the same thing we named the file. And we're not going to give it any props right now. And We're going to return something, and we're going to return some JSX. So we've seen a few things now, but I'm going to, you know, put something like this. Sometimes it's a hassle. Okay. And we'll just say, okay, you know, we'll top level, we'll say something like contact page. What is on a contact page? I like pre just because it makes things look a little different. So I'll say email help at website.com because we got the very in demand URL website.com. And yeah, maybe that's it. Let's just add a marquee in there because everyone loves a marquee. You know, contact us for a good time. Okay. And so we have this contact page. Where does it go now? Like we created it, but how do we see this on the page now? Let's say we want to associate it with a URL, not /about, but /contact. So how do we, you know, make it so that if I go, like right now, I'm going to try and go to /contact, right? But I got this page, and we'll explain how to do this, but we're not seeing our page. So how do we make it so that when I go to /contact, I see the right page? So which file might I want to update to make this association between a URL and a component? I'll look at chat once again. Yeah, Mason has it. I would love if people would be willing to speak these answers out loud, but Mason has it, which is, and Daniel as well, which is let's go to router.jsx and make that association. So I'm going to router.jsx here. And the first thing I'm going to do is import another page. So I'll start writing import contact page, and it understands. And then I want this to be a sub page of apps. So I still want to see, you know, that nav bar. I just want to change what's in this section. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, well, I have these, you know, I have slash and I have /about. Well, I want another one that I haven't seen yet. It's going to look like this, and that's going to be /contact, the slash coming from here, which renders app, and the contact coming from here, which is a child that is going to replace that outlet thing. And that's going to render contact page. And I'm going to save it. And before we do anything else, we'll see that if I go to /contact now, indeed it understands. And we're seeing, you know, the sub page. But notably, when I did that, if I hit enter here, it's re-downloading everything. So that works. And that's, of course, necessary if they're doing it from the URL bar. But if we wanted to have this as part of our own website's nav bar, so that we're truly doing client-side routing and that it's not re-downloading anything unnecessarily, we'd go to app.jsx and we would just add another one of these. So I'd add another one of these like this, and I'd say /contact, and notice that it is the link element, which takes a single argument 2, which is like its href. So I'm going to save there. And now we see contact here. And now notice I can go to about. I see the about page. I go to contact. I see the contact page. Nothing happening on the network because it's all already on the client side. We're just switching between components. And you know, you see up here in the URL bar, we are indeed seeing that change in the URL, in the page, no actual talking to the back end or downloading, you know, things that we've already downloaded a second ago. Cool. So I feel pretty good about that. That's our demo of things, and we want to dig in a little deeper, but we've been going for at least 45 minutes now. I'm going to give you guys a little break, and we're going to come back just to make up for my own mistake of waking up a little late. How about we're just going to take 10 minutes this time, and we'll be back at 10:15. Does that sound good? All right, sounds good. I'll see you all in 10 minutes, and feel free to put questions in this chat or anything else that, you know, yeah, sounds good. See you guys in a bit. Hey all, we're back. I realize I forgot to pause recording, so kind of hard to edit it out, but I'll work on that. So I see in the chat, Dan is asking about I wonder if you're going to touch. Yeah, so Dan, based on what you're saying, you are correct. There is a way to use components that look like routes and route as an alternative to the current setup. That is a way that React Router can do things, but I initially tried to do it that way, but its current API was really pushing for this new way of doing it because certain features that it now has, like this loader function feature, which we will eventually get to, are pretty cool, but you can't get them with the old way of doing things. So in general, like if you're starting a new project, it's usually good to do it the way that the current version of the tutorial is telling you to do it. But I do know that there is that older way, and we were doing that as recently as last semester. So there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. You just don't have access to certain features, and their docs are going to be a little less useful as a result. Let me see, shouldn't we have a folder for routes that separates the reusable components from the route components? Do you want to clarify what you mean by that?
Yeah, just so eventually, like I'm maybe thinking forward, but like eventually you'll have things that are like what goes on a contact page, right? And that'll be a form and maybe a button,
Right.
and all those are going to be start to look like different components. And right now we have the setup of the files in a way that now you're just going to have everything as a component.
Yeah. What you're saying is very valid, that it would be perfectly legitimate to have another folder at the same level as components called like pages, and pages has pages and then individual components that these pages are made up out of that are reusable. Those would go in components. So that's a very good point. Folder structure is a surprisingly complex question. There's no right or wrong answer, but you can certainly make choices about folder structure and naming folders that do not help you. And of course, you can make choices that make it really natural to read. So I would say that that is a good instinct, and by all means do that. It's a little, I guess the only reason I didn't do that is because it's such a small little example app I'm making. But as a project gets bigger and bigger, that tends to be the hardest problem to solve, which is how do we keep all this organized so that a new person can just at a glance say, oh, that's the pages folder, and that has pages, and that's the component folder that has specific low-level components. So it's definitely good to be thinking about that. Okay, and I have this poll here, so I'm gonna put something in. How do I do this? I'll not in Slack. In Zoom, I'm gonna put something in the chat. So I just want to see this. We're testing it out. I'm sending you guys a link in the chat to a Slido event. Slido is something that we have access to now. And let me actually follow it myself to see what it looks like. So I'm clicking on it, and you're going to get this questionnaire thing, multiple choice. Just these are, I heard a different teacher online with this method. And basically it's just, we want to get from everyone in the class this idea of, where are you? Go, which is totally comfortable with the pacing and understanding. Let's keep moving. Slow down, which is this last section I'm not so good on. Let's slow down and, review it. And stop, which is like, you've already passed the point of my understanding and I'm somewhat lost. Can we stop, reorient, and understand where we are so that we can eventually, transition to slow down and then go? So I think you just click things. Where's the go faster option? I should add an option, something like, okay, like, yeah, I'll make a new poll with something like go faster. This is the option for tryhards that want to make sure everyone knows they're, the alpha programmer or something like that. So we'll make sure we add that option just so, Dan can always fill it out. So has anyone filled this out yet? I think, how do I, oh, I see this is the, what we're seeing right now. We're seeing goes, we're seeing no stops, which I like. I would like to, I understand there's no great way of anonymously sharing this, but for anyone that's saying slow down, if we could turn that slow down into certain questions, like what do we want to review on? What's an area, what's a sticking point?
So yeah, I have a question on the links and how those are kind of formed. The difference between the link, like link keyword, and the A tag. From my understanding, the A tag, like you don't go in the back end and like refresh the page with new information displaying the about page. That's the difference between the A tag and the link tag. The link tag somehow just uses the data that's already stored.
Yeah, so
on the computer.
The A tag is just regular old HTML, so there's no reason it would be aware of React Router or how it does things. The A tag is something we just get from HTML, and it's how we do links, and it's still a perfect choice for linking to other websites, right? Like if you were to try and link to http:// or whatever it is, / www.google.com, that should be an A link, right? Because that's not client-side routing. That's not relative to your own site. You're not going to save anything by doing link. I don't think link will even understand it. But what link is there to do is it looks like an A tag, but it's really just something that is hooked into React Router and will tell React Router, like there's no backend thing going on at all. It's just telling React Router, hey, just like a use state, it's saying, hey, something changed. I think you want to re-render now. So it's just all link doing is communicating a change to that outward router provider component that's in main.jsx. So we will get into this tomorrow, but provider is this general idea, or there's this hook we haven't discussed yet called use context. And it's basically a way of making other components, no matter how deep they are, aware of some prop, essentially. So router provider is that component that, gives this context to everything below it. And that context is just this one thing called router. And so that is what makes it so that, when we're in app.jsx and we click a link, it's able to update something and trigger this, change.
Thank you.
Is that satisfactory in terms of what you were looking for?
Yeah. So when you click onto a website, your computer automatically downloads a certain amount of data, and the link just heads over to that data rather than getting a new HTML request. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's almost as if we had how like you can have like a component and a subcomponent, and in that high level component you could say like use state something, and you might pass down the set state function to that subcomponent. So it's just like that, as in link is a way of telling this higher level component, we updated something and now we want to re-render the whole thing. But there really is no network stuff happening. URLs are just a way of communicating this idea of we want to render a specific component now.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And really under the hood, it is just use state, as far as I know, things like that. Cool. Any other questions about where we are so far? Seen a good amount of goes. I feel good about that, but still some slowdowns. So anything that feels weird about this so far? Because right now we just have like these 3 or 4 files, and all those together act to make the router. This general page app that includes the nav bar that allows us to link to our different things. And then this router file, which links up a given URL to a given component that is then rendered in the space over here. Okay, not seeing any questions in chat or hearing them. We will give another minute for it, but if there isn't one that wants us to slow down, I can look into using Slido to create some kind of anonymous, hey, what do you want us to slow down about? But yeah. Okay, well, if we were to move on, everything here is stuff we covered. App is what's going to render for / anything. And then those links are how we move between those pages, purely client side. And then outlet is, the outlet for that specific subroute. And router is going to hook up the right things for / or / about. And we want to stop here to say, okay, front end versus back end routing. This is always a major sticking point for students because it's a little odd. Why? Like it's sort of inescapably frustrating that we now have these two concepts of routing. And when we were talking about a URL, it's not always clear whether that URL is truly something that exists on the back end or something that, is really mostly existing on the front end. So let's dig in a little on that. So I have some stuff in bold here to say, first, the most significant distinction between front end and back end routing is that if you type a new URL into the browser and you manually hit enter, that will always send a request to the back end. So even though I have, this front end site here, if I say /about and I hit enter up here, we actually downloaded all that information and then it rendered the page. And then only once it rendered the page again, did React Router's, router file kick in and say, okay, well, we're matching /about, this is what we want to render. But anytime someone hits a URL outright, we're going to re-download everything. And the reason for that is that if you never went to the website, how would you go to the website? Well, you would put it in the URL bar, and obviously it doesn't already exist on your computer, so it has to go grab it from this domain. And once grabbed, then we can, move about without talking to the backend anymore. But until then, that won't be possible until we have some copy of it. So, anytime you try and do anything, and this is a route that doesn't exist, it's going to go to the backend, re-download everything, and then maybe render a specific thing. So that is the first and most important rule about the difference between front end and back end. And similarly, everything I said about hitting enter into the URL bar of the browser is true for an A tag. An A tag has no idea you mean specifically client-side routing. It's going to try and make a request to that site, whether it's relative to your own website or whether it's someone else's website entirely. And it's going to make a request to the backend and try and download that site. And then the other point, which is, or the final point, which is pretty hard to digest, and it takes time to get used to this, is they are not exclusive. You need both. And what I mean by that is that if someone were to go to your site for the first time, let's say / or / about, that's going to have to live somewhere on the backend to serve that up. And so we might have something like this where, initially we said like, okay, well, if someone goes to / we want to serve up a specific HTML page. And then we're saying, if they go to / about, well, we want to serve up the exact same HTML page. Why? Because, well, the part that makes / and / about unique, that's all within the client side code. That's within our React code. We don't need to worry about that difference on the back end, but we still need to make sure we're serving the right thing up in either case. So in either case, we're serving up the React app. And of course, it might look something like this, where it's just serving up an index.html page at the end of the day. But that would get pretty annoying. Like if your front end or your client-side routing kept having more and more routes, you wouldn't want to have to list each one out individually in your back-end routing. So eventually you'd probably come up with something like this, in which you'd say like, okay, well, and these are regular expressions. We haven't totally gotten into these yet, but just a wildcard type of way of saying, okay, as long as it starts with API /, then I want you to, look here in API.urls. But if it starts with anything else, just serve up the React app. And so this is what we would want to do long term, just because we might have too many possible ways that we too many possible client side routes for the front end. But of course, this way kind of can blow up a little, because in this old way, if I did slash or slash about, we serve something up. But if I said slash doesn't exist, then we would actually get like a, a 504 error or something. We get an error saying, or actually just I think a 404, something saying, we don't know what that is. We don't have that file. So it failed, but not because the backend had a problem. That's a 500 error, but because the client requested something that doesn't exist. And in this approach, that doesn't work. If you request any site, including slash doesn't exist, we're still going to serve up the same React app. And we will get to how to work with that in a moment. See what else is here. Yeah, so the main point I'm trying to make here is just that having this idea of client-side routing does not mean you don't have to have a backend route that serves up the actual content. It's just that the detail, you'll be serving up the same React app for lots and lots of routes, and then the details of what that page looks like given a certain route is going to be handled on the client side. But we want to ask, or opening the floor to questions for that, because it's a tricky little idea. All right, I see some interesting stuff in the chat about how we can make that Slido stuff better, which is interesting, and do want to dig in on that, but not at this moment. So any questions about, yeah, any questions without figuring out the Slido stuff yet? Is there any non-anonymous questions about what we've just talked about in terms of the difference between front end and back end routing? So for example, if I were to go over here and I were to write slash contact and hit enter, can anyone walk me through the full step of things that happen when I hit enter here? So I hit enter in the URL, what happens entirely? I hit enter, where does it go first of all? What happens? In the URL bar, type some stuff, and I hit enter. What's going to happen? This is I know most of you guys know this. That's why
I'd like to give it a shot.
Yeah, let's do it.
So when you hit enter, it's going to go to the backend server, which is the React dev app server, and it's going to request I guess it would request index.html, and inside that it would go to, could you bring that page up? Because I think it goes to the React router GSX. And basically it downloads all the resources that it needs.
Yeah.
When you
So
hit the enter.
first off there, what you're saying is like, right, I'm going to go to slash contact here. And the first thing it's going to do is read this part and say, oh, we're going to the backend and we're looking for something called slash content on the backend. And that backend, maybe we're just doing it with Vite right now, but ultimately it's going to be served up from some kind of backend thing. So it's going to match some kind of URL pattern, and as a result, serve up some HTML.
Right.
Okay, yeah, I was just saying that to to say, yes, that is what we are doing. And now, okay, so we serve up that HTML, what happens now? Or like we match slash contact, and what did we serve up? Did we serve up just a specific contact page, or did we serve up our entire React app?
Well, in this example, it seems like it's going to return index.html along with that index.js file, which contains the entire React app.
Exactly.
And if you click on links inside of that have a, I think it's the link,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just going to kind of change the kind of a use state, and then display information in the outlet. It's not going to go back to the server.
Well, before we even do any of the clicking of the link stuff, you are right about all that. But before we do any of the clicking the link stuff, we had this URL bar and it was slash contact, and we hit enter, and we had something on the back end to respond to slash contact, maybe respond to slash anything besides slash API. to serve up the exact same React app. And then that React app gets, in the form of HTML and JavaScript, gets to the client side. And then what happens once it's at the client side? How does it start running? So it sees this page right here, right? Index.html. What happens when it reads this page that it received?
When it reads that page, it's going to load the main.jsx, which is going to read the router information, which is router, and then it's going to read the path of slash, and then go down to contact and load the contact element, which is connected in the components contact page .jsx.
Yeah.
And that's all built into the React app. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Almost exactly perfect. That's what's happening. The only thing I want to be specifically clarify about is that when we go to slash contact, it's actually going to match on slash and render app. And then it's going to see that contact part and say, oh, that's what I fill in an outlet. But at the top level, it's going to match minimally to slash. And that's why we're going to see, the nav bar, and then the sub thing, the child, is going to render over here. But yeah, and we're doing all of that, even though we're talking to the back end. The idea is like, this is the essential difference between back end and front end, that when I hit enter here, we did have to go to the back end to match something like slash contact, even if it was, a wildcard. So we just match slash anything. We had to match something to serve up the HTML, the React app. And then once the React app is received and it starts running, that's when React Router gets set up with router.jsx, and it's going to see that it's currently at slash contact, and it's going to make sure it matches it up to the right components. So I'm saying all that just to say that you need both. You need to talk to the backend to actually retrieve data in the first place. And then on the front end, it's going to be aware what to render. And then of course we get the extra nice feature that now if I click a link element like about, we're actually not going to talk to the backend again like we did before. It's simply going to talk to this router.jsx file and say, okay, well, I know I don't need to go to the backend because they just clicked a link component. So given that they just clicked the link component slash about, what in router.jsx has, or what does that mean for rendering the page? Well, we're still on app, but now I just want to replace that subcomponent that was, maybe homepage or contact page with about page.
I do have a question real quick.
Yep.
If you were to have conflicting information on the back end and inside the React app, would you get conflicting results? Like if you click the about page, it would run inside the React app, but if you did slash about and hit the enter and there was a different route on the server, would that feed a different page possibly?
Yeah, you are correct that if you did it in a strange way, it could be something like, okay, let's say when you go to slash and you hit enter, let's say that's the only way you serve up the React app, right? And then from there, if I hit about as a link, well, it would show me the right page on the client side. But if I hit enter now, that's going to look on the back end for slash about. And if there is nothing on the back end matching slash about, or if we're serving up a totally different page, that would get confusing. Yeah. So this is part of the reason why the front end, back end routing thing can get confusing, because really you have to make sure every route that you care about on the front end also has an equivalent route on the back end just to serve up the exact same React app. But if you didn't do it quite right, you could just serve up, you could make it so that when you click slash about, that's going to bring up a specific thing. But if you actually hit enter about, you're going to get a different page. But you generally, that wouldn't happen because you as the programmer wouldn't design it that way. But certainly if you were starting to make a site, maybe you made it so that slash serves up the right thing, and that, you're using React Router, so you can go to slash about and that works. But maybe at some point you're going to try and do this and find out, oh, we don't even have a route that matches that on the back end. So that will break.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like if you make a mistake and you start to see weird results, it could be because of that.
Exactly. And that's the main reason that you have to remember that there are two things, front end and back end routing, and they can get confusing because of that. Because while you might expect most people will enter your website at / and then just click around, the fact that someone can, you know, click around and go somewhere and then later try and go back there, like let's say they made a bookmark, or just they type it in explicitly and hit enter, that is always going to go to the back end. And so we have to make sure we account for that. Okay, great question, because that is the essence of why people get confused between front end and back end routing, and it is confusing. So that is fair to be confused.
I had a question on this one. Where would the back end be for this example?
Yeah, so it's a little confusing because we're using Vite right now. When we're using Vite, the backend is Vite, that it's just sort of serving it up on a specific. It's like, you know, like if I type npm run dev, we'll see that it says like, okay, we're actually serving that. You know, it's sort of doing the build for us. It has these files, and then it's serving them up on, like, no matter what we went to on localhost 5173. It would always serve up that React app. But in the real world, and what we'll see tomorrow, is that eventually you're going to serve up your React app from some kind of backend that you own. Vite is just there as like a development environment. It's easy to get set up and going. And I mean, you will use it in the backend too. It's just that you'll be running npm run build, producing the output files, and those are going to live somewhere that your backend is aware of, your Django backend, and then it serves up those files.
Okay, that makes sense. And my next question is, in the URL browser, so you have localhost 5173 and then /, and that / is just gonna automatically render the home page. Is that correct? So how does it know to go to a home page if it's not like typed out, or is it always typed out?
Well, the idea is that no matter what we put in here, no matter what we put after this /, given that we're using Vite, no matter what we put after this /, we're going to be serving up the React site. And then it's only once it grabs the React site that it's then going to use React Router to be URL aware and render a specific thing. So like, does that make sense? As in, if I do this, that is still going to serve up the React site no matter what. It's just that once it loads the React site, it's going to look at this router object, and it's going to say, well, I have /, so I'm going to go to app. And then do I have a child with, you know, called this? I don't. So what should I show? And that does lead us into our next part. What do you do when you, like, we'll see here, if I take out this error element thing just for a second, and I'm going to save this, and I'm going to reload, or not even reload, I'm just going to hit enter here. What happens? Well, we actually, I mean, I think this is Vite giving this to us, but we get some kind of like page saying Vite does not know what you want here, or actually, no, rather it's React Router saying you got an error, something's wrong here, because we don't have a match for that. So am I on target?
Close. So does it know automatically just to show the home page if it's just /?
Not
like if it's the
necessarily,
first
no.
one?
That's what this is for. As in index true is us saying that, you know, index true is only going to appear in a child array. And it's saying, okay, well, I know that we're already on a certain route, let's say /. So if that's all we have, just /, then render the home page. But if we have / plus something like about, render about page, / plus context, render contact page. So index true is there to tell it if it's / and nothing more, then render specifically the home page. That's a good question. Yeah, we haven't pointed that out explicitly.
That's the answer I was looking for. Index true.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder, even if I just said like path / here, does it understand? Maybe not. Like if I do this and then I try and go to / will it go to homepage? It does go to homepage. So that's another, like that maybe is easier to read even. But for whatever reason, they they also provide this where you could say index true. Cool. And of course, these are all things that are like relative to slash, but given how this is set up, like, you know, I could have multiple, just like with the children, I could have multiple router objects at the top level. So I could just as well have an extra thing here. And of course, the order is generally going to matter. So it's going to look at things first. So before I look at this sort of, you know, all purpose, you know, slash followed by other stuff, I could just as well say like path, you know, slash secret entrance. And what is the element for that? Maybe we just specifically show the contact page when that happens, meaning that we're not going to go the normal route where we, you know, also show everything in app here and then outlet. We're just saying at router.jsx, okay, if they go to this specific route, we're going to show this specific page. And I'm going to save that. And then we're going to try and go there. And indeed, we go directly to the contact page. It's not like, yeah. So that is there too. I just wanted to point that out. So while we're using this like children method, we very much can just have specific routes associated with specific components. But this method is sort of nicer for the real world situation where you want to render a certain thing for every page. And then depending on the route, you want to, you know, have sort of a subcomponent representing that specific page.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have like, you're gonna keep having like, children of children of children. Then, if you want to continue like Amazon does, where they like have a lot
Yes.
of different, like they go through a lot of pages.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe you absolutely can do that. So I could say something like, if we want to get into it, like, you know, let's say about. So we have, you know, element slash, and that matches app. And then slash about is going to match app with its outlet being about page. And then I could say maybe here something like, okay, well, what about the children of about? So maybe I'm going to say, okay, well, the about page has a child. Let's say we'll give it 2 children. We'll say one of them is going to look like this more or less. I notice I can just do things in line. So I can actually say something like, okay, so when we're at, you know, when we're at about, maybe I would say like when we're at about, I'm just going to put a div in there that's going to say like index slash about. And then I'll have one more that looks like this, which I say, okay, and then when the path, when the path is, you know, slash about, and then I guess what, slash something else. I think I might even have to do that now. So if it's going to be slash about slash, you know, sub page, then I'll just have a div, or, you know, of course I'll have a marquee actually. And I'll say, you know, something like slash about slash sub page. And then the question becomes, okay, so I have I'm obviously it's breaking in some kind of way. Error, absolute route path sub page nested under path slash about is not valid. An absolute child route must start with the combined path of all its parent routes. Not sure what it means by that. Let's see. That is who knows what that means? Do I just, not sure if anyone, yeah, I guess that's what we want. And then the idea is that if I now went to slash about slash just like that, we're going to see about page. But if I go to slash about slash sub page, what happens, I believe this will break. well, we're not seeing anything unique. We're not seeing this marquee anywhere. So why not? Well, because in about page, we never define any kind of outlet thing. So if I go to about page, just like in app.jsx, I had up here, import link outlet. So I could grab that and I could say something like, in my about page, I'm going to have, I think I just want the outlet. And I would just say, okay, well, actually, I want you to something like this. Something like this, where I'm going to say, okay, actually write about page, and then the outlet goes over here, and I'm going to save that. And now if I go to /about, we see the page, and then we see this thing underneath. And then if I go to where I just was, subpage, we see that as well. So yeah, you can keep using this outlet thing, and in routers.jsx using children, you can keep doing that to make subpages of subpages of subpages. I'm sure it gets ugly and hard to follow at a certain point, but this seems like a pretty good API for building up hierarchies like this. So does that answer our most recent question about about like subpages? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think it is good that we like demo things early on, but and these are great questions, but we do want to also just like, I'm going to go back to our docs now, or our curriculum notes, just to say like, okay, well, what are the next feature, that we want you all to see. But you are correct that just like our element that matches path / and element app has children, well, its children can have children. And that is what actually makes it powerful, that you can just keep building out on that pattern. Okay. So what else do we have here? Well, based on what I was saying here, like, we might match anything. And what that means is that if I go to the back end with my routing, I might write something like not found, doesn't exist. That's definitely not a URL we have. And if I hit enter, I get this error, which basically says, hey, we got your React app, but there is no matching route. And we see that here. We actually get, some error, or a warning rather, in JavaScript. So it doesn't know about this and is trying to tell us what we might want to do about that. So there's a couple of solutions, and one of them, the first one I give, is over here, in which this is an example where we just have, home and about to start. But I could always add a third element and use a full wildcard to say, hey, if nothing before this match, show me the error page. So right now we don't have this. So I might have, I have this this child, which gives me the home page, and this child, which gives me the about page. And I have maybe some other ones, but I don't really want to worry about them right now. I just want to say, okay, well, you're going to have a last one. And if nothing else up to this point match, we want this to match everything after /. And what do we want to serve up? Well, we'll serve up an element, and that element is something I already created called error page. And if I look at error page, it says, just 404 not found. And then it looks like this, where we printed out that whole page, because indeed it did match /. So we served up app. And then what went an outlet was over here, this wildcard thing. So that is definitely one approach. Sorry, did I hear something for a second? No. All right. So that's definitely one approach. And that is a way that we can do error handling, where we just always have this last, catch-all thing. But React Router has a pretty sophisticated API, and it includes this idea here, where I'm going to remove this right now. And I can just say at the very top level, error element. And there I'm saying, okay, well, we're going to /, right? And once you go to / render app, and then below app, you're going to have, these children. So if it's just / render the home page, if it's / about page, if it's, / contact page, we won't worry about the next one. But the point is, if any of these match, subpage, whatever, if any of these match, we're good. But if at any point in this list, it says, okay, we've exhausted the list, we don't have anything that matches, there is no associated component, it will throw an error. An error element catches that error and says, okay, if when trying to render this path with this element, I get an error, then I'm just going to show error page. So now we'll see that if I hit save, now when I go to, if I go to something that I know about, like this, I see the whole page, including app. But if I were to click on example invalid route, which you'll see down there is just / doesn't exist, that goes to 404 not found, because instead of matching a specific handler that matches everything for our error situation, instead we're saying, if we had an error and we can't do it, show a specific page, replace everything with this thing called error page. So those are two methods that, depending on whether you want to show what's in there or you want to replace it outright, you would either use that wildcard or error element. And that's necessary because chances are from the backend, we're going to be serving up, everything that doesn't look like API / if it just looks like / something, we're going to serve up the React app, and we have to make sure that we handle that situation nicely, because, without either approach, we're going to get React Router's own handler for that, which is, maybe not ideal and maybe tells the user a little too much about what's actually happening behind the scenes. And it's just not a great user experience. Not that, of course, this is an excellent user experience, but the idea is I could build on this to maybe have it be a nice 404 page. Okay, so that's the error element thing. And I guess I'm gonna, should I use Slido again, just to, like, if I say stop Slido, and then I think I could say reset results, and kind of make it a little bigger to get the link. Okay, share link. If I send out that Slido poll again, now the Slido poll is saying, okay, for what we just saw, like, since we've last seen a Slido poll, are there things we want to review? And I know that we don't quite yet have a means of saying, well, this is what I want to review. I'm going to look into adding that, but I just want to see where we are.
I can't submit on the.
And I have to hit start. Very good point. So reload that link and you should see it now. All right, this is, of course, what I want to see. All cars go. Great. So that's good. That makes me feel confident that I can keep moving now. So I'll stop that poll for now. And we're going to go back to the content. And okay, so we saw this error stuff. And this is using this error element thing. So the next thing we want to see is when you're doing backend routing, one of the most powerful features you can do with routing is parameterized routes. Basically, you're going to have something like /users / the user ID /post / the post ID. And on the backend, you're actually able to peel off those numbers to say, oh, that's valuable information. I'm going to use that to look up the specific data I want. And then I'm going to serve up a specific resource or something like that based on those parameters. It's almost like a function takes parameters. Well, your URL is like a way of, is translated into parameters that are meaningful to whatever matches that URL. And on the back end, when you did stuff like this, you had like /users / and correct me if I'm wrong, but Django uses the standard method of colon user ID or something. And that's how it knows to match some specific number or something, correct? I believe that is correct. Well, it's the same exact thing with React Router, that I could have a path that looks like this, where I say, everything's going to match on /, and then I might have something off of / like Pokemon, but it's not just Pokemon. It's got to be Pokemon / colon Poke ID, and then we're going to render the element Poke Viewer. And without looking at the element Poke Viewer, what we are hoping is that we're going to be able to go to /Pokemon/ a specific thing like 44 or something. It's going to be able to grab the 44 and then use it in some way. So how do we do that? Well, I took something from week 8, day 3 and slightly modified it, this Poke Viewer thing. And this is what it's going to look like initially. So it's a fair amount of code, but we've seen this before where basically I have my component Poke Viewer. I'm still using useState, useEffect, Axios, and I have this new thing from React Router DOM called useParams. So useParams is a hook that is specific to React Router, and that's why we have to have that, router provider component at the top level so that we can use specific hooks it wrote. So part of the whole hooks thing is that you can write your own hooks. It's kind of an advanced topic. The average person doesn't do it, but libraries often will do it to say, oh, here's, how you hook in with our advanced functionality, just like you can hook into React's own advanced functionality with React's own hooks. So all useParams does is if I want to get access to that param Poke ID, I say useParams, and that's going to return me an object of, all the params within that URL. In this case, we just have one. So we peel it off and call it Poke ID. And this useState here is just because, we have a useEffect that's going to run exactly once, and it's going to use that Poke ID to grab a specific resource. And then in response, it's going to set some useState. And of course, when that useState is updated, we're going to re-render the page. And the page looks like this, where it says, if there is such a thing as Poke data, then I want you to show the name of that Pokemon and look through this list of its images. And over here, I'm just, I have to do a specific thing because of its own API. So like, I have to like specifically get, those images that I want. But this is, we've seen this more or less, and then I just have the, the URL. And we have an example of that here where if I go to my React site, you'll see that I have example Poke page. And if I were to look in my children, I have, Pokemon / Poke ID, and that's exactly how it works in Poke Viewer. Don't worry about this yet. We're going to get to it in a second. So if I click on example Poke page, that's going to bring me to /Pokemon / 44. And it does work like expected in that first we had Gloom, and then if we look at it in slow-mo, let's go to like about, and then let's go to network. And we're going to clear that. And we're going to see that, when we go to example Poke page, we didn't have to go to the backend to get a new page, but we still did kick off some, backend stuff to actually talk to the Poke API. And so, it took a second there. And let's actually see that with some throttling. So we're going to make it slow 3G just to see it. And I'll go back to the about page and I'll reload just to make sure that throttling is there. So as you see, when you're throttling, it actually takes some time. And this is actually the experience of people who, websites will run this poorly, assuming a person has a bad connection. And it's worth at least considering what it looks like. So this is taking forever by modern standards, but yeah, this is slow 3G. Can't believe it's taking this long. It's almost like I should just do fast 3G, because at least that won't be that bad. Okay, so as you see, yeah, it had to do all of that just to grab the page, and then it specifically lined us up with about on the front end. And of course, if I go to contact or about, you see that's instantaneous, even though we're on this slow connection. But if I click example Poke page, well, we actually go to that page immediately, but it was pretty fast anyways. But it kind of took a second, right? It took a second to search out and grab that data and then show it. And if I look at Poke page here, or Poke Viewer rather, I'm saying this thing where I say like, okay, well, only if it exists do I show this stuff, otherwise what? Well, maybe I would write it like this, where I'd say, okay, well, if there's Poke data, then show this. But if there's not, then we're going to show, just an element that, maybe it's just like a div. And it says loading, ... save. And so now if I reload this page, let's assume we already had everything like that. Okay, so we have the page. Now we're going to try and go to example poke page. We go there. It takes a second, right? It takes a second, and then it fills everything in. I'm not even seeing loading. I don't know how it's able to do it so fast, but I'm going to example poke page. I would really expect it to say loading. Why is it not saying loading? If there is poke data, then do that. But if there's no poke data, sorry. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing loading. Oh, is that I have an error here? Let me do that quickly. So this is just for the sake of the next part, demonstrating one possible issue with slow connections with React.
I thought that the ternary was like, if it's true, if it's there, it would render that true.
Yep.
And then the false, if it doesn't exist at all. And I think it was still evaluating whether it's true or false. And then once it finds it, it would just render it. Or if not, it would do the loading thing.
Yes. Everything you're saying is right. I think I just realized the reason why it's not working is because I'm doing things in a different way here than over here. So I wasn't able to quite demonstrate it. So let me just grab this version of it because I ended up doing it. Okay, so we're gonna write something like this. But everything you're saying is right, where I have, poke data like that, and that's if it's there. And then if it's not there, I would just have this div where I say loading .. /div. So I'm going to save that, and we're going to reload the about page. And just bear with it, taking as many 30 seconds or whatever it takes, because this is worth demonstrating. Why isn't it showing up? Sorry, it's good to have two versions of this stuff for the sake of this sort of thing. Maybe it'll work now. A little annoying. We're going to see it in 1 second. I guess it's good to have like version copies of it. Yeah, okay, so we see the about page, and notice, of course, we can go contact, we go about, no change there. We're able to reload it immediately. If I go to example poke page, I click it, it's going to say loading, and it didn't take that long, but we saw it said loading. We went right to the page, and we see loading, and then we kick off this thing looking for more information, and only if we get that information do we then render it. But immediately upon moving to example poke page, we see loading. So that's what I wanted to show you. That's what it was all for. That's a slightly subpar experience, that we go to the page, see loading, and then we see the information. And what we're going to be shooting for is something where we say, well, we have this, React router knows when we switch routes. So what if we're on the about page, we click example poke page, and what if example poke page is aware that it needs some, data outside of itself? And so even though we click it, it's not actually going to move from the about page to this poke page until that data is downloaded. So instead of seeing loading for a while, instead we would stay at the about page until the data was there, and then only move there once all that data is ready. So that just is a slightly better user experience. And that is something that modern React router supports. And is one of the reasons I use this new API of theirs, because you couldn't get this without it. So they call this loaders. And the idea of this is that we don't move to a new page until everything the page relies on is done. So the first thing is that we are going to update our router like so. And the only changes are that we are now exporting an additional thing from PokeViewer called PokeLoader. And this path has another thing in it called loader, which we're pointing to PokeLoader. So coming back here, I'm going to do that in router.js. I'm just going to start hitting, yeah, so we're going to get something called PokeLoader. And then I'm actually going to uncomment that. So, right, when we go to the Poke page, we're going to look at this element PokeViewer, but we're also going to use this loader, whatever that is, called PokeLoader. And we're going to go back to no throttling there. And you'll see this doesn't work right now because it's like, what is PokeLoader? So we're going to update that as part of our PokeViewer file. And all of that new data is down here. Again, it's kind of long, but it's cool to see how things change. I guess it's not that long. So before, just notice how before I'm using useState, useEffect, all of it, right? So I'm using sort of React's core hooks, but these things are kind of taken care of for me if I use React router stuff. So I'm still using Axios, and I'm using this new hook called useLoaderData. But before we get to that, we're also going to export a new function, which is going to be an async function. It's called PokeLoader. That's what is coming over here, the PokeLoader that we pass as the loader for this path. And what it looks like is, well, one, it's able to, it's aware of the params. So it's going to know about that param PokeID. And it's going to be able to kick off this request. And then it's a promise. So we're going to await that promise. And then when it's done, return promise.data. And then we have the actual PokeViewer component. And you'll see that the PokeViewer component just says PokeData equals useLoaderData. So this is going to equal whatever returns from here when the promise is complete. And then we're doing the same thing we did before to grab the images. And it's the same thing here now. But we really don't have to do anything with loading now, because what we'll see is that if I save this and I come back here and I reload, it's going to go to slash to begin with. Or go to slash to begin with. Okay, I went to slash, and of course, like always, about contact, nothing is changing in the network. About contact, and now I'm going to go to example Poke page. Notice, I mean, it happens so fast that it's a little hard to see. So maybe we will go back to the throttling. So bear with me while I wait. But this is, you know, this is the actual user experience. Often it's worth seeing. So, right, I can still go about contact. I can go back and forth to those easy without any kind of wait, because we don't do anything that requires a network. But when we do something that requires a network, notice we don't switch from the about page until we have the data, and then it shows. And so that's like a much, even though it looks like who cares when it's just a few seconds, you could totally see how on lots of sites, like, you don't want to move to the next page just to show a totally blank page and the words loading. You just want them to stay at the current page. They'll see some kind of like spinner in the bottom. And then once the data is ready, then you actually show that page once it's ready. So that loader thing is a nice feature. And you could also see how you didn't have to think about use effect or use state. It's kind of all contained in this one little thing there where you just say use loader data. You know, it's explicitly understood that you're only going to grab this once when the page loads. Obviously, you could still use effect. You could do it all manually if you had a specific way things had to be. Maybe you had to react to some change and do it again. But this is a nice thing for pages in which you just need that first call for data. And then once you get it, you load the page with that data. So this is the API for that. And let's stop for a minute and ask questions about that, because this is new. I mean, this is also new to me. Like part of using any sort of library like this is you got to learn their API, and their docs are only so good. And so, like, you know, if you want to use these features, you just have to learn, like, okay, well, what do their docs say to do? And this is the example that they give. But I didn't necessarily know about use loader data until I read it in their docs, because that's not built into React or anything. It's just something they provide. Okay, yeah. So we're going to give you a break in a second, but any questions so far about this? Should I make a Slido poll about whether we want to make a Slido poll about our understanding of what we most recently talked about? Yeah, I hear you. This is we probably do need to jump in, and this is the thing that happens as we learn more and more about this stuff. Like someone can teach you React, but at a certain point when you're learning a new library, like, you know, React Router or anything else, React something, you're just gonna have to learn that API and how it sort of integrates, and your only real resource is going to be the docs. So ultimately jumping into it is the best way to learn it. And that actually does bring us to the end of what we were talking about. So first, we do have those docs over here. So we can click it and see, and I find their docs a little annoying that like, this is not what I want to see at first. And also, I don't know, they have a tutorial, they have examples, but they don't give you a great way of saying like, here's the essential bits. The tutorial is pretty good, but again, it's not necessarily, yeah, your mileage may vary with this stuff, and that's okay. But of course, we can like look into stuff and say like, oh, well, what is a loader? And then we see, okay, it says this is how to use a loader, and these docs are all we have. This is the only way we really can learn about it. So, especially as we get further and further and we get closer to like personal projects and group projects, this is really what the work of a developer is, knowing enough that you can now read docs, and docs teach you what's next. And the game is basically maximally use code other people wrote, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And in order to do that, find a good library with good docs, with good, you know, the more other people support it, the more there are articles about it. And then you can actually like, you know, utilize someone else's code to get way more done than you could on your own. But we're going to take a break now for, let's say, approximately 15 minutes. We're going to come back at 11:30 a.m. CST. And when we come back, we're going to spend the next half hour trying to do what we did in Video Store Part 4. And maybe I'll just show that to you real quickly. So if I just go to, I guess I want to go 2 levels. We have Video Store Part 4. Let's just try it out. But I think in classic fashion, if I try doing npm run new dev, it's going to say like, sorry, you got to no, it didn't do that. I love it. Cool. So basically, this is our website. And before we used to show the same thing on the same page, but now if I click it, I actually go to a new page, and I have this button here, back to homepage. So this is closer to what websites tend to be. And again, this is just kind of like a mock site. I actually saw Creed 3 this weekend. It's okay. Jonathan Majors is a really good actor, but if you've ever seen a boxing movie, you know exactly what's going to happen. Kind of nothing shocking there, but it was fun. But yeah, so this ultimately doesn't look so fancy or special, but it is nice that, like, you know, I have this list of things, I click it, it updates over here. So there's like meaningful information in the URL. I can go back, and it's just kind of like a seamless experience. And it's just there to show off that, like, yeah, routing can help you and break up your pages a little better. So you're not just like, you know, trying to shove everything in one giant component that, you know, contains all the other components. But we're going to try and implement this ourselves when we come back. And we're going to come back. Let's say you have until 11:35 a.m. CST. All right. See you guys in a bit. Stop sharing. And okay, we're back. I don't see any faces yet. I see, there we go, some people, okay. All right, so assuming we are back, we have 25 minutes for the rest of class, and the goal was to update this video store to include the React router stuff. So I already have a finished version of it in demos and notes as part of Video Store 4, and you can see it over here. And I just want to give you 2 options. One of those options is we could walk through the code and try and understand how it was done, because as it turns out, had to change a fair amount to make it work in this way. Or alternatively, we could just start from scratch and start making it. And we probably won't get as far, but that would give us more of a sense of like, how do we literally make this from scratch? So without creating a Slido poll, does anyone want to suggest one option or the other? And feel free to write it in chat. Perfectly good use of chat. So do we want to spend the next 20 to 25 minutes trying to do this from scratch, or going over the actual final version of it that I came up with for Video Store Part 4? And then, of course, the assignment today is going to be implementing those features and or integrating React Router into your own, an app of your own design and choice. Going over final version. Okay, we have one vote so far. If we have any others, feel free. Otherwise, okay, 2 votes for final. Seeming pretty good. Final. Cool. So we're gonna go over that final one, and I have it right here, right? So just so we could see it, let's drag it out a little. Might even want these on 2 separate pages. So I'm gonna put this one over here. So this is it, and this is what it looks like. Where basically we just have a sub page, and we go back. This is our whole thing, and this is the code for it, which I'm running. It's done in Vite, and looking at the package.json, you'll see that the only dependencies I added that we didn't have automatically were React Router and Axios. So what does it look like? Does anyone want to tell me where I should first look? As in, here's my index.html that gets served up. Where should I look for the root of my application? After like a few seconds, I'm just gonna start. What was that?
Didn't we change the root to the router.jsx?
Sort of. Well, the thing is, we're going to start with this HTML page. So according to this HTML page, what's the first file, the first JavaScript file that runs in our code? Main, exactly. So let's follow main. And what is main? Well, main is just a little wrapper saying, okay, go into index.html and grab this element with ID root and start putting stuff in there. What are we putting in there? Well, this React strict mode thing is just to make development a little easier, but this router provider, and we're providing the router at /router. So here it is. And what I came up with was, there's a couple things being imported here, but essentially we're going to have slash is going to render app, which is going to be like our main page. If we go to a page we don't understand, we'll go to error page, and slash can match one of 2 children's. If it's just slash, then we show the home page. And there's something associated with the whole homepage called all films loader. And then if we go to /film ID, then we load the details page. And that's associated with another loader called film loader. And in both cases, the idea is that it won't fully render the page until that loader has finished grabbing the data. And it just kind of makes a slightly simpler API for making a single call that defines the page. Okay, so where should we look next? What do we want to look at? Well, app is going to be like our sort of home page. So we can look at app, and you see there's not much to it. We're just sort of saying, here's what it looks like. We're always going to see this H1 video store. And we're going to have outlet here, and outlet is going to be hooked up to, this router, where outlet is either going to show home page or details page, depending on the situation. And then there's the error page, which, is real simple, but that's just going to show whenever we don't have a matching route off of slash. So I'm going to go here, and I will see that, yes, if I went to slash, I see the video store and everything in it. And if I go to a specific film, I still see video store and everything in it. Just the details or the part replaced with outlet is different. And then if I were to go here and say, slash something that doesn't exist, we get this 404 not found page, which obviously could look nicer, but for now, at least we're handling it in some way. Cool. So I think the next thing that makes sense to look at would be this main page, how it's actually rendered. So we see, we're rendering app and we're associating it with homepage and all films loader, and both of those are coming from homepage. So we're going to look at a homepage here. And a couple things. So we're getting this use loader data from React Router. We get using Axios. We have this subcomponent called inventory item that we use. And then I have two JSON files here. One called inventory, which is just going to be a list of the films to look up because I just wanted some hard-coded values. Each one of these represents an ID as far as IMDb is concerned. And then the API key, I just put it in a separate place. API keys in the real world are usually secret, and we do get into that later in the curriculum, but it's somewhat of an advanced topic to like hide an API key so that it's not in your repo, and it truly is a secret, as in you don't want random people, even within your own company, maybe to know the API key, because the API key is only valuable and that it represents you uniquely, and it's essentially like a password. But for this case, we could just, we're just storing it and using it, and we don't really care that other people can see our secret. So before we even look at the homepage, what we're going to look at is this all films loader, and it's an async function. And what it's going to do is first we're going to map through the inventory, and the inventory is just that list of IDs. And we're going to map through it, and we're going to say, okay, for each ID, get, and go to that specific URL to get the information on that. And notice that Axios.get returns a promise. So what's returned here is actually a list of promises. And then we're going to do await promise.all promises. So this is actually going to do the async await stuff. It's going to wait seemingly until we have all that data fetched and it returns in the form of responses. And then I'm just going responses.map response to response.data. And then at the end, all film data is going to contain the data for all the films. And this is all going to complete because of how we defined it here. This function will complete running before we actually render homepage. And when we do render homepage, if we want to get that data, we just say use loader data, and we can console.log it, and we do. But ultimately, we're just going to take that data and use it to map to inventory items. And we can dig in and look at what inventory item looks like. And, I suppose this is important. We're going to look into what each inventory item is. But first, let's just see that, if we open up our console, we look at console here, we're going to refresh. And indeed, we do have, these 4 titles with all of their information that we got from that API. And that's what's actually printing here. So all films data, when we use this use loader data hook, we have access to everything by the time the component runs. And then we map it into inventory item here, and let's look at what each inventory item is like. So each inventory item is taking props, in this case, just film data. We got some feedback that people find it a little weird when we write things like this. Film data. That's just destructuring, but the point is you can just write props if you want. The only argument your React element is ever taking is props, and then you can dig into that as deeply as you want to. So we're gonna return this thing, which it's just gonna have this H3 with the title and an image that is the poster. But there's something here that we actually didn't talk about until now, but it is important, which is we're going to use this other hook React Router gives us called use navigate. And use navigate is for whenever you want to navigate to another page in the same way you would with link, but instead of it being a component and something on the page that it's like, oh, that's a button to click, and then I link to it. Instead, this is saying like do it programmatically. So instead of having something that look like, we don't have a link currently, but if I had, something like link and it said, go to film, I could have something like this, where I just, this is exactly where I want to go. And so I say, yeah, got to wrap those in the curlies. Did I get that quite right? Okay. So we could say something like this, and we would have this link that would go to the film. And let's just see that working. Gonna have to add link in there to make it work. We'll reload the page, and I could click on each one of these and say go to film, and you'll see it has the film, and then it has that ID, and it does load it. And I can go back to the home page. But I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to make a specific link. Instead, I wanted to make it that when you click the image, or really anything in that area, I wanted it to go to the film. And in order to do that, I don't want it, a component to do it, like so with link. Instead, I want to do it programmatically. And the way we do that is with this hook use navigate. And all use navigate does is we do use navigate. We give it no arguments. It returns this thing called navigate. And then from there, we can say like on click, and in response to the on click, we navigate where we want to go. So not too different, but worth knowing about. And so now we can, click anywhere, either, the title or the image or in between, and it will bring us to this details page, and we can go back. And so that is all there is right now to the homepage. So before moving on, do we have questions about how we did things for the homepage? I'll look in the chat quickly. Okay, so you guys seem pretty good with that. The only new idea we introduced was this use navigate hook, which is hopefully pretty straightforward in terms of how it's used. Very, very close to having a link element. It's just not on the page. It's something you do in response to like an event or something. Cool. So that describes the homepage, but when I did this navigate here, I go to /film/ film ID. And where does that take us? Well, if we look in router, we see that we have a route for that, film/ film ID, the param. And that is going to go to details page, and details page also has something called film loader. So we can go there. And we see, first of all, this film loader makes a request to to get that specific film. And the first thing you're probably thinking is, well, didn't we just grab all the info for those 4 films? Why are we doing it this way, right? We grab the data for those 4 films. Why don't, in the homepage, why doesn't the homepage just pass the data to the details page, because we already got it, right? Well, that is a good point, but with the way we're doing things in React Router, we should think of it as like each route is technically maybe its own thing. As in, when we go to / we get homepage, and homepage needs all 4 of these. And then of course, if we click this, we go to a specific one. But what if the user just requested this first? What if the user just hit enter on this, right? So they want to go to that specific page. They don't need to grab every, maybe that homepage normally grabs like 1,000 images or, details. We don't need to do that. And also they might, if they're going directly to this page, it's sort of like we want this page itself to be aware of what it needs. And it's sort of separated from the homepage. And so even though it seems like, maybe extra work, it is on some level, it's nice to separate them. And it's ultimately not a major cost that we're just, speaking to an API maybe one more time than we would have to. And of course, if you really wanted to be careful about it, you could come up with some kind of like caching solution with like local storage. There's ways you could be clever about it, but don't be clever about it initially. Instead, it's just, yeah, we're going to get that specific data for that specific film. And the params is going to be, grabbed from the URL itself. And so this loader is going to get that specific film data. And just like before, we're going to use this hook, use loader data. It's going to get the specific film. And then we're going to render the details page, which looks like this. And this is just destructuring to get what we care about off of it. And then notice we have a link here to link back to the homepage so that, you know, we have navigation happening. And then that's everything. That's literally the whole app right now. And as you can see, it took a lot. Like if I was starting with Video Store Part 3, which you will be doing, it is a little annoying that you gotta, often when you're integrating a new library, you end up in the situation where like you gotta rip out a lot of what you previously did just to recreate it in the way that this new library wants you to do. And so ideally you get to start every project with all the, you know, choices you want to make up front. But usually in reality, you start a project with some choices and then over time you say, oh, we want this too, or you pivot in some way, you make some change. And you end up having to pull things, you know, rip things out and change things. But the end result is a lot less code than it was before. And it's kind of cool that you don't see use effect anywhere. You don't see use state anywhere. We're actually getting to think at an even higher level because React Router is handling a lot of those details for us because, you know, use loader data kind of uses them internally. So yeah, we're done like 7 minutes early, so we can just take questions now based on the design of this app.
I think now's a good time to readdress my earlier question because this is exactly what I was running into. Had a list of things. When I clicked on one of them, I wanted to go to a details page. And that's what I ran into. It's like I used that object to map out like a teaser in the list. Why not just pass that to another component to do the more detailed? One thing I thought about to take out the 2 API calls is I wasn't using app as the route. I kept that as the header. So my route provider was in app itself. And I had like a layout that added in the app nav. What that did is you can set up use state on the app level. So you can have that be your films. And then that way, if you put your loaders on that in app where they're being made right above the routing, like as long as it's in app, that way you can actually update that state from your loaders and then use it.
Yeah.
You might have to set that state from your homepage, but then when you call the individual one, your loader can pull it from the state in app and pass that into your new page. I was trying to do it and I was struggling with the new data loaders, the new data routers, like you were talking about, the create browser routers required to do that. What I ended up doing was making it all one page and just making conditional rendering.
Yeah.
If something was selected, and I have no idea which one's better, because it's kind of like when I go to like to my bank and it, you know, like list out like mine was like a list of like expenses and different things. It's like I have a list. I don't want you picking a random, like picking the random URL for the numbers. Like the user shouldn't know those numbers. It shouldn't be meaningless to them.
Yeah.
Your internal ID. So you really want them to go through the list and pick out that one. Was it? I did. The other thing I didn't like with the routing was you kind of go back to default when you go back to the home page, and you can really see it in this one. Like you have to pull all the titles again. So if you had like a filter on your home page, and you say like by title, and they filtered it out, and they had like just those 4 remaining.
Yeah.
If you clicked on one and then you went back, you'd have to either, but you lose the state of the filter unless you had it in some other context.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of the main reason I felt to not change in the page. So I think it gives you more spread out, but it seemed to me like it made more sense when you really change like what your states are, what information is being displayed. I felt like it really helped then because you go down a whole different route, whole different things you're pulling, like contacts versus inventory. It was an interesting, it just made me think about the pages differently. Because with Django, you really do need a separate page to display different things.
Yeah.
It's not dynamic on the page.
Yeah. Everything you're saying is true in that, like up until, 2 days ago when I discovered it, I've never used use loader data or this,
Yeah.
and it is using everything you're like under the hood. That's what it's doing, everything you're saying. And that's a perfectly legitimate, good approach. Like, don't see React Router as a necessary tool. And also, you don't have to use all of its features. So like you're saying, like, you could write this mostly with use state and use effect and do that all at the top level in app. And then you're just using the router to, you know, render one component or another in outlet. But ultimately, all the data is going to live in app, and then it's just going to be passed to the specific component without any of these loaders. So that might be too much to write for now, but I know that when trying to discover this, I did notice that there is something in React Router called, let's find our hooks. It's going to be, you know, use something or other. So something, use outlet context. Yeah. So this is a really interesting thing that, you know, we might be using this outlet thing, right? And outlet can be passed something called context, and that's essentially outlet's props. So you can pass outlet whatever you want in terms of state. And then whatever the actual outlet is, so in this case, outlet is going to be hooked up to, like in this case, it has some data, and then whatever it actually renders, so let's say, you know, child is what's going to be replaced with outlet. Within that child, we can just say use outlet context, and then we grab whatever those props are. So there totally is a way just to do everything with state and props and not worry about this stuff. And then you wouldn't do that reloading. You're right, because like if all your data and state lives in app, and app is top level here, well, app is never getting reloaded. It's just outlet that's getting updated, and the data passed to outlet could change. So what I'm saying is that is a perfectly legitimate approach. And I would say that this loaders thing, I included it because it seemed cool and it was new, and it's, you know, seems to give you a lot of functionality. But I could see how it could be more trouble than it's worth. And by all means, just use effect and use state, and, you know, whatever you can get from the API, like use outlet context, just to do it the way you want to do it. So I would say, like, think of use, whatever it's called here, think of this like loader business as like an optional approach, but it shouldn't be like, you don't have to walk that path. You definitely, and that's why stuff like use effect and use state and props are your bread and butter, because like you can make anything out of those, and ultimately React Router is making everything it makes out of those. So it's just a matter of whether you want to piggyback off of some complex API someone else wrote, or do it your own way. Which, you know, if you do it your own way, you'll probably write more code, like lines of code, but you might understand it better because you're used to those like core building blocks.
I think it's also very use case dependent. So for like the video store example, if you're not using URL paths, then you can't, like, I couldn't go and look for a movie to watch tonight and copy the link and send it to my wife, and she can just click on it and see the movie, right?
Mhm.
In your expenses thing, it might make sense to not have that ability. Like, I know in my bank account, like I can't copy the URL for a specific expense and send it to my wife and she can go to it. But yeah, it's going to be more use case, I think. But I do see a lot of value in being able to bookmark a page or send a link to somebody and have them go straight to it.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, like from the philosophical perspective or whatever, I would say like up until day 3, or including day 3, everything we did, that's like core React. And what we did today, like part of our curriculum, we want to teach you this idea of front-end routing. And so we use React Router, but it's one of many solutions. And it's also something that you don't explicitly need. Like you really could just have a single page and that does everything. And again, like, yeah, you might not want to expose something as a parameter in a URL. So yeah, I think it is worth like noticing just that, like, it's almost like everyone has to take the 101 class, and then everyone has to take the 201 class, and everyone has to take the 301 class. And then at this point, we're saying like, oh, well, you could take this, 302 class, but this isn't 401, as in this isn't the necessary next step of React. It's just another thing you can do now that you know enough React to, use hooks and do this and that. So like, yeah, I will say, like, I've never really used React Router before. I use Next.js mostly. We determined it was too heavy duty for what we wanted to teach. It does too much for you. It's a little too much magic. But like, it's good to think of things in terms of problems and what you want, and then find the best fit you can, because like, don't feel you have to walk the path that React Router is telling you to walk. You can do it how you want, and maybe React Router is the right library for you, maybe it's not. But this is almost like, today is almost like just to get experience working with a non-trivial React adjacent library. So something that like builds on React, but is not core to React. All right, well, we're 2 minutes over now. I'm going to stop sharing and